Hnrs, welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our last discussion about World War II, right? And we are currently in the thick of it right now, all right? Way in the thick of it. We are deep in the middle of this bad boy because right after Germany invades Poland, you're going to see a series of really intense events that are going to lead to Germany basically dominating the continent alongside of Italy and Japan expanding their dominion inside of Asia, right? So something that we have to understand, though, is we also discussed a couple of different things. For example, a lot of difficult German words like Blitzkrieg and Lebensraum and Anschluss and all this other crazy stuff. But the thing that you also have to understand, too, is that the election of Winston Churchill is going to be very important because he's going to keep Britain in this war without surrender, okay? But where we left off in class was right after that, whenever the Germans overwhelmed the French at Dunkirk, right? And what's going to end up happening is they're going to go from Dunkirk, which was right there, and they're going to head southward towards Paris, okay? And in 1940, specifically on June 22nd, 1940, within 8 months of the war beginning, September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. Oh, close. Almost 9 months. All right, so yeah, anyway, now. So in about 9 months of this war, Germany has now successfully gone in and taken over France. But some of you are probably asking yourself, but Mr. Terry, France stayed in World War I until their backs were almost broken. How is it even possible that the Germans are going to force their surrender? Well, there's a very interesting little weird thing that happened, okay? Basically, the south of France betrayed the north of France and gave them up, right? So what happened is France is going to end up getting split into two different zones, right? The two different zones are going to be the south of France, also known as Vichy France, or the Free Zone France. Notice because it's capitaled in Vichy France. But Vichy France was the south of France that actually sided with the Nazi regime, right? And the northern French territory will be occupied by the Nazis, and then they will spend a lot of time creating massive defensive fortifications along the beaches in northern France to try and protect themselves from any type of surprise attack from the United Kingdom or any other ally that may or may not get involved in this war. So like now, going into it though, you have to understand that that is going to be a crucial moment because a lot of Vichy French soldiers are actually going to serve alongside the Nazis and actually fight for the Axis powers along the way. So that's how he actually managed to take over France so quickly, okay? So going into the next thing you have to understand is, y'all, by 1940, everything in khaki or dark brown has been controlled or taken over by the Germans or the Germans and their allies, right? Look at all this stuff. And the only place that's left at war with Germany is just Great Britain. That's it. They're the only ally left. And Germany begins this entire campaign known as the Battle of Britain, right? Starting right after they forced France to surrender, the Battle of Britain begins in October of 1940, where he does a massive blitzkrieg attack against the British, right? Sending bombing raids, bombing schools, churches, normal establishments, trying to seek to destroy not only the physical power and ability of Britain to fight this war, but also the mental ability and power for Britain to fight this war, right? And they're going to continue to attack and bombard them, and it's going to be a very, very important moment because the Axis powers are also even going to officially form and adopt Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria into their alliance as well. As you can see with that map right there, basically Hitler and his allies, Hitler and Mussolini controlled so much of the continent, about as much, if not more so, than what Napoleon took over, right? But something we need to remember is that Napoleon took over close to 80% of Europe. Hitler will end up doing the same thing alongside of Mussolini and Italy. And the thing about it, though, is that Hitler and Napoleon will make the same giant mistake. For those of you who actually remember this, journey back into your brain, and what was Napoleon's biggest mistake about his entire campaign? None other than the invasion of Russia, right? So when Napoleon invaded Russia, it ends up being the nail in the coffin that destroys his empire. Well, Hitler will invade the Soviet Union, breaking the non-aggression pact with Stalin in June of 1941, a mere year later after the Battle of Britain and the surrender of France. And this will be a massive turning point, right? A huge turning point, a cataclysmic turning point, a moment in time when literally Hitler goes from being like a dominant power in the continent to slowly dwindling very quickly, like a souffle when you yell a little too loud. So this is going to be a really big moment though, okay? Because now the Allies are going to begin to start pushing back. Now it's a little bit weird though because not immediately at first, all right? For anybody that's watching this flip right now that's not one of my students, before you get on your high horse and try to jump into my comments, you have to understand, y'all, that the Nazis actually were able to push through a huge chunk of Eastern Europe, including areas of modern-day Ukraine and Belarus as well. Now, the Allies will start pushing back after this, but Operation Barbarossa is when the Soviets were able to actually, they gave up a lot of land and, actually got invaded in this giant pink swath of territory in Eastern Europe. However, they held off the Nazis, right? Operation Barbarossa was what Hitler referred to the operation of invading Russia as, but they were able to hold them back. There were 3 key cities. I'm going to say this again. 3 key cities. I'm going to say this again. 3 key cities that you should definitely highlight in your notes to talk about, because they're going to be the 3 key cities that do not relent, back down, or surrender to the Nazis despite enduring massive casualties, right? And those 3 cities include Moscow, Leningrad, and Stalingrad. The Soviets were able to basically endure devastating punishment from Nazi attacks and bombardments for several years. And I don't know if you know this or not, but it's absolutely wild when you think about it, because 27 million Soviet citizens are going to die during World War II trying to withstand German bombardment, right? So going into our next phase, though, I said June of 1941, and for any of y'all that know much about history, you know that something else is coming right down the pipe. It's still a massive turning point, though, okay? Because Hitler is going to begin to get stalled up in Russia. And then you've got the United States, who will enter in December 7th, 1941, following the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, some of you are like, but Mr. Terry, why would they get involved in Europe if it was Japan that was attacking them? It's a great question. All right, so now, the U.S. is going to enter after the attack on Pearl Harbor and declare war not only on Japan, but on Germany as well, because they are a part of the Axis Power Alliance. And they know full well that you're going to have to defeat all of those parties, including the Pacific Theater and the European Theater, to accomplish an actual overall goal of victory in this war, right? Now, the U.S. will enter after the attack on Pearl Harbor, which takes place on December 7th, 1941, a day which will live in infamy. They do this, though. Why did the Japanese actually attack the Americans is a very crucial thing, for 2 reasons. One, they attacked because the Americans had actually cut off like crude oil supplies and some other resources to Japan due to their invasions of other neighboring Asian countries. But the other reason why the Japanese attack has a lot to do with proximity, all right? So Japan was growing their dominion very aggressively in the Pacific. Well, for those of you who have ever looked at a map every now and again, you know something really important. Well, Japan and their dominion was getting very, very close to Hawaii, which also sits in the Pacific, right? And Hawaii was also the location of the entire Pacific Fleet of the American Navy, right? Pretty much the entire Pacific Fleet was stationed in Pearl Harbor, and they actually thought that they were safe because the water was shallow and stuff like that, and they thought that they would not be able to be attacked in that area, but they were severely wrong. That right there is the sinking of the Arizona that I know some of y'all have actually seen before. A bunch of y'all went on the trip last year to Hawaii with school, with the Chapelettes and with band and stuff, which is super cool. I think Emily LeBlanc and Lila and I think Claire went as well, which is really cool. But that is actually the moment that the Arizona was sunk right there by the Japanese attack. And I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,200 or possibly 1,500 people died at the attack on Pearl Harbor because it was a surprise attack that the Americans say they didn't know about. Some naval intelligence officers were like, we need to anticipate this, but apparently they weren't taking it as seriously as they should have been. So going into it, though, America is now going to enter this war and declare war not only on the Japanese, but also on the European powers of Germany and Italy as well. So what you have to understand, though, is that the Allies will adopt a Europe-first strategy. They want to try and liberate Europe first and then focus their attention on Japan. That does not mean necessarily that the Allies focused all of their efforts in Europe. The invasion of the Pacific did actually start pretty soon after that, but they wanted to dedicate most of their resources to actually attacking Europe first, right? And this campaign that the Americans are going to be involved in is going to last from 1941 to the end of 1941 in December 1941 through 1945, all right? So the Allies are going to seek to liberate them first in Europe, then turn towards Japan. But why or how they're going to do it, for those of you who remember that map a second ago, how much territory and stuff and land that Hitler actually controlled was absolutely massive. So how are they going to actually try to liberate that land in an area where they've got reinforcements on the beaches of northern France, and then they can only, there's the Mediterranean right there? What are you going to do? Well, the Allies started with an invasion of North Africa, all right? They decided to invade North Africa at several different locations, including in Morocco and Algeria, and then also trying to move through this area, push the Nazis and the Italians back, and then push them up into Italy, all right? That was the idea when the Northwest African invasion during Operation Torch was actually to push them all the way through this area and then back up into Italy. And Italy is right below Germany, so they're hoping that they could push all the way up through Italy and then put pressure on Germany's southern border, forcing it to surrender, right? And then what's going to happen, though, some of you probably don't know this or not, but they do get held up a little bit in Italy because the terrain is really, really hard to navigate, but they also need something else to happen. While the Allies are invading North Africa to try and open up another front against the Axis powers, the Soviets have to do one thing. They have to hold the Germans off at Leningrad and Stalingrad. And y'all, they're bombarded for years. for years, all right? Years, losing so many lives that there were actually accounts of Soviet citizens trying to stay alive by consuming a soup that was made of rats and wallpaper, right? Like just to try and stay alive because the Nazis were like actually cutting off vital trade resources and food stores and destroying homes and buildings. This, for example, is a picture of a children's park with a building burning in the background from a Nazi artillery strike, right? So that actually what we need, though, is we need the Russians to hold on, right? Hold on while we open another front. Well, the thing about it, though, is what the Allies realize when they actually get held up in Italy and that they get kind of stalled out in Italy because it's so narrow and the terrain is really, really rough there in the middle and the Apennine Mountains are in the way. Plus, you got to get over the Alps, which is going to be really difficult. They decide to open up a third front, right? And that would happen on June 6th, 1944, in an operation some of you have probably heard referred to as D-Day, right? The D-Day operation was a massive, several-wave storming of the beaches in Normandy, France. Yes, for those of you who are wondering, that same set of beaches that were heavily militarized and armored in the northern area of France. Now, I know one of you right now, like Harper's like, hey, like, isn't that a bad idea? Because there's like all these like German machine guns and stuff like that, and pillboxes and dragon's teeth that'll prevent like tanks from rolling out there. And it looks really scary because they have to go through the water to get to the beaches and then go over the crest of that thing. It seems like it's a bad idea. By the way, this is the Higgins boat, and the Higgins boat was actually invented in New Orleans, and it actually is considered the boat that saved the war, all right? Fun fact. So going into it, though, what they're going to do is they actually get real crafty with it. They try to thin out the Nazi reserves on the beaches of Normandy themselves by sending a bunch of radio signals to confuse the Nazis, right? They're like, hey, we're going to attack here. Oh, wait, no, we're going to attack here. Oh, wait, no, we're going to attack here. Oh, wait, no, we're going to attack here. And then they actually attacked in this series of beachheads right there. There were 5 of them in total. The Americans attacked the beaches codenamed Omaha and Utah. And then the Brits attacked what is known as Gold and Juno. And the Canadians actually attacked another beach called Beach Sword. And they actually went after it, and they sent 3 waves of paratroopers and infantry that landed on that beach, and they completely overwhelmed the German forces that were there and opened a third front and began to push into Europe, okay? And also, because of that, Germany was forced to take a large chunk of their military that had been invading Russia and move them over to try and stop the American advance that had now broken through in northern France, and also to stop the American advance that's coming up through Italy. Now, that means that the Soviets are receiving less pressure. So that means that they begin to push back. Looking at this map real quick, as you can see, the Germans are being pushed against, and the Italians are being pushed against by all 3 sides, right? They're moving in now through northern France because of the Battle of D-Day. They're moving now up through here, and like the George Patton and his heavy artillery is moving up through Italy, and then now the Soviets, who have endured the worst bombardment ever, are pushing back against the Germans and shoving them back into Germany, right? Now, in this process, what's going to end up happening is people get a little nervous, right? And the Italians are actually going to kill Mussolini, okay? Now, I don't like having this picture on my president because it's a very violent and grotesque picture, but the Italians actually sense the fact that they are beginning to lose the war, and just kind of like they did in World War I, they decide to switch sides, right? So the Italians actually end up showing up, storming, and arresting their fascist leader, Benito Mussolini, because fascism never works, because when you run out of people to blame, people start blaming you. And so what happens is they capture him, arrest him, and then they hang him upside down from a gas station, and they beat him to death with sticks and stones. And I think he was actually shot beforehand, but I'm not positive. I have to look that up. But yeah, and that gas station is now McDonald's. Fun fact. Now, Hitler, though, also would commit suicide in 1945 when the Soviets began pressing on the eastern border of Germany and getting very dangerously close to Berlin. He actually went off and married his wife, or he married a woman named Eva Braun, and they were married for about 24 hours. They went down into a bunker, and Hitler commits suicide because, again, he knew he was losing, and he was running out of people to blame. And also, in the process of actually invading the eastern reaches of Europe, the Soviets are beginning to discover a bunch of these camps, right? And it turns out that a lot of them were concentration camps that were not actually killing people that were Jewish, but also were holding Soviet POWs in the same types of conditions. So Hitler actually probably killed himself because he knew for a fact that if the Soviets got a hold of him, it would be a very slow, painful, and awful death, right? Now, what's going to happen, though, in the Pacific theater is a campaign called Island Hopping, right? So over there on the Pacific side, now we have hit VE Day. VE Day was in May of 1945, which stands for Victory in Europe Day, right? Because Hitler commits suicide suicide, and so does Mussolini. And after a small campaign of trying to oust some other Nazi officers and stuff like that, but they all end up committing suicide using cyanide pills like Goebbels and what's his name, Erwin Rommel and stuff like that. They end up doing all that stuff. But what the Americans are going to do in the Pacific theater is because they need them to surrender as well. And the Japanese were really, really holding on and trying to hold out, even though Hitler and Mussolini will die, right? So the island hopping campaign that takes place in the Pacific theater is where they literally hopped from island to island, taking it over one at a time until they ended up on the doorstep of Japan, right? The Battle of Midway being a major one, the Marshall Islands one, the Battle of Guadalcanal was a huge one that happened as well, right down there, and the Solomon Islands. And so what they're going to do is literally hop from island to island, taking it over using an air raid attack and then also a manned marine attack as well. But what will end up happening is they get very dangerously close to the doorstep of Japan, right? Right around Okinawa and Iwo Jima, they start figuring out, I don't think the Japanese are going to surrender without us going and attacking Japan directly. And enter in this guy. And that man's name is J. Robert Oppenheimer, right? And J. Robert Oppenheimer was in charge of this thing known as the Manhattan Project. The entire time during the war, J. Robert Oppenheimer was building bombs that would actually end the war and devastate the world going forward for generations, because he created a weapon that could kill thousands of people in the blink of an eye, right? And they would surrender after the bombs from this project were dropped onto two Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The code names of the bombs were Little Boy and Fat Man, and these are the actual mushroom clouds from above those cities, killing over 100,000 people almost instantaneously, which is a devastating thing when you think of, because Harry S. Truman, who is the president of the United States of America at the time, is the one who decided to do that. And some of you are immediately like, well, wait a minute, Mr. Terry, I thought you said it was FDR. I thought FDR was the president at the time. Well, he had actually died before this decision was made, right? He died while in office during the very first weeks of his fourth term. And so that means Truman takes over as his vice president. And he was the one that decided to drop those nuclear provisions on civilians in Japan, which as a historian looking back on, I still think you could have figured out a way to do it not like that, right? But that's a personal opinion. So going into it though, that right there would force Japan's surrender on the Missouri vessel, on the USS Missouri in September of 1945, and World War II would come to an end, right? And that right there is what this class is. That's Western Civ right there, right? That is Western Civ at Chappelle. And I want to say a quick shout out to all y'all. And on your last flip, I absolutely appreciate every single one of y'all. And you have made my last year of teaching absolutely phenomenal. First period, fifth period, no matter if you have and I have had 1,000 conversations or no conversations, just know that I appreciate every one of you. And it's because of kids like y'all that I'm desperately going to miss teaching every day. And so I want to say thank you for such a great year. And I hope y'all enjoy the rest of your time at Chappelle. And if y'all ever need anything at all, y'all know where to find me. So y'all have a good one. We'll see y'all soon.